Okay, good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on when you're listening to this. I'm recording this initial podcast episode at 10 to 10 on Monday, the 5th of July, 2021. And a friend of mine wanted me to start a podcast for a few reasons, but I won't go into those. All that you need to know is that this is the first episode of what I'm hoping will be sort of a new podcast series on my YouTube channel. And the reason that I'm starting today is really just because I watched a very interesting film called Borg versus McEnroe. It came out in 2017 and I just watched it on Mubi, the film streaming website where they handpick films of a certain nature to show. So it sort of limits the sort of faff that you have with, selection like you do on, for instance, Netflix, where there's, seems like an infinite number of films that you could watch on any given day. Whereas with Mubi, I think there's only a limited selection. So it sort of narrows your decision making down, which is why I think people quite like it. And I've had a subscription for a few months now, but tonight was actually the first film that I ever watched on the streaming service, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The reason that I chose to watch the film Borg versus McEnroe is because I'm a huge tennis fan. I have been for about 10 years actually now, almost 10 years. I think it's 10 years this year. And I'm quite well versed in the story of Borg versus McEnroe, the famous 1980 Wimbledon final, men's singles final, where the two of them played an epic match, which was for a long time considered to be the greatest tennis match in recorded history. And it was only eclipsed by the even more iconic 2008 Wimbledon final, which was played between Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, with Nadal winning that one in 5 sets, 9-7 in the fifth, after, an intense battle of 5 hours and multiple rain delays and a back and forth, almost pendulum-like course of the match. The 1980 final was really the original one. As I say, for many decades, people consider that to be the greatest tennis match of all time. It was 5 sets. It went, I think, Borg won at 8-6 in the 5th set after having, I think, was it 7 match points in the 4th set, tie break, and before that as well. And it's famous for that tie break as well, which I think, I just watched the film, I think it was won 18 points to 16 by John McEnroe. So pretty incredible stuff. And the film is very interesting because it's sort of quite a I want to say simply done. It's not over dramatized, and there's not too much dialogue. It's very precise with its dialogue, and it's very well shot, and the acting is exceptional. Particularly, I mean, the actor who plays Bjorn Borg has such a striking resemblance to the man himself that, I mean, that always helps with a film. And yeah, I just wanted to make a podcast episode about this basically because the film ended and I was so moved and enchanted by how the film played out that it got me thinking about the power of sport and the meaning of sport, I think, in so many people's lives. And this has particular resonance at the moment because obviously England are in the semi-finals of Euro 2020, the European Championships, which has been an incredible journey so far. And it was only the other day that we sort of thrashed Ukraine 4-0, which was the first time that England had scored that many goals in a knockout competition, a major knockout competition, since the 1966 World Cup final against West Germany, which we won. Famously, it's our only ever major tournament win as a country in football. We've been searching for one ever since. And I think the whole nation has been captured by that journey by this current team through the Euro tournament. You know, it's coming home. You've probably heard a lot of times, and quite rightly, you know. And not only that, but obviously Wimbledon, the tournament itself, is on at the moment, and it's the first time the tournament has been held for 2 years, because last year it was the only tennis Grand Slam that was not held. All the other tournaments were fit in. Obviously the Australian Open in 2020 was played in January, so that was pre-COVID, or at least pre the real cataclysm of COVID. And the French Open, which was normally held in June, was pushed back to October of last year, and the US Open was literally held only weeks before that. So Wimbledon was the only one that was not held, and it was not, you know, rescheduled like the other ones. So I think that people have really missed it, and I know a lot of tennis players have probably missed it, and it feels extra special to have it back on this year, particularly with a full crowd, which I think is one of the test sporting events in this country where they're testing out having full capacity crowds. One sec, I'm just going to have a sip of my tea. Alright, this isn't ASMR, or at least it's not intending to be, but, you know, whatever floats your boat. Beautiful. Forgive me if I do that. It's a decaf Yorkshire tea that I'm drinking. I don't know whatever you're drinking at the moment, whether it's water or some sort of alcohol or tea as well. I feel like this could be quite a tea podcast, but that's not for me to decide. Well, for me it's a tea podcast tonight. So yeah, that's fun. What was I saying? Yeah, so I watched this film about Borg versus McEnroe in 1980, and as I say, it was very beautifully shot, very beautifully acted, a very beautifully directed film. And I wanted to talk a bit about the power of sport, and this is something that Russell Brand made a video about only last week, I believe. And he was talking in reference to when England beat Germany in the round of 16, and how football brings the whole nation together in quite a unique way. And that really just got me thinking, and if you haven't seen that original video, I would recommend it. I'll probably link it in the description, because he talks very eloquently about the unity between community, sport, and spirituality, really, and how sport can give people a sort of primal, quasi-spiritual experience when they are a fan. When you go to a stadium or a ground and you see, you know, your team play and then win and go through a journey in a tournament or, you know, an event, and there's a kind of euphoria and connection that you find in sport which you really don't find in a lot of places, and it's quite a phenomenal thing. And I say phenomenal with every inch of that word emphasized, because the phenomenon of sport is such an intrinsic part of human culture, I think, particularly Western culture. If you think about all the sports that there are in Western culture that people love and people, you know, would do anything for, to play, to watch, to support, you know, and the range of emotions that people go through during a sporting moment, you know, is quite incredible, you know, and it's something that I think that people perhaps don't think about too much, you know, and I think people probably thought about it and felt it a lot more during the last 18 months, where particularly last year, when I think all sports was stopped for several months. I know the Premier League was stopped for a few months, for about 3 months it wasn't played. The tennis circuit was suspended, the ATP was suspended. You know, all these big tournaments were being cancelled or rescheduled, and there was no live sport for people to enjoy, either in person in a ground or a stadium, but also there was nothing new to consume through technology, which I think is how most people absorb sport these days, because it's very difficult to get tickets for major sporting events these days. It's very expensive, and the luxury of technology allows anyone with an internet connection to enjoy any sporting event around the world from any country at any time. And this was something that was so severely missed, I think, during the pandemic situation of last year. This year has been a bit different because I think sport has been pretty much uninterrupted as far as I'm aware this year. I know that the tennis circuit has been pretty smooth. I know that the Premier League has been pretty much uninterrupted. There's been a few games here and there cancelled, but for the most part it's been very fluid, and I think that governments have worked very hard to keep allowing sport to go on because they recognise the unbelievable impact that it has on people's psyches, people's mental health, and as I say, it's an almost spiritual need that people have. People crave this kind of euphoria, this ecstasy that you find in sport that you don't often find in things. I think, I don't really like to use this expression, but your average person, your everyday person, who perhaps, isn't into what you might call high art, shall we say, or art in general, they might find what an artistic person would find in a painting or a film or a piece of music. They find that in sport. That kind of instantaneous connection, that escapism from what you would call quote unquote real life. Your life is suspended for a moment during a sporting spectacle, and there's a build-up of tension throughout a sporting event, and then there's a release. The release of tension is either going to be positive or it's going to be painful, but either way there is going to be a release, and it's that build-up of tension throughout a match or a tournament that builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then somebody wins, somebody loses, and depending on the fan base, one part of the audience are going to be absolutely euphoric, crying with joy and shouting and screaming and, hugging their fellow fans or their family. Another part of the audience are going to be absolutely distraught. They're going to be crying with pain and, indignation. And it's so primal, this experience of sport, that I think is so interesting. And I've experienced it in my life. My main sport for the last 10 years, as I say, has been tennis. And I've been lucky enough to watch a lot of Grand Slam finals on the TV. My favourite player is Rafael Nadal. So anyone who knows a bit about tennis, or even just a bit about sport, I think, because he's become so historic in just sport in general, is that he's been phenomenally successful at the French Open. And so I've seen a lot of his finals. I think I've seen all of his French Open finals since 2012. That was the first final I watched of him. Well, actually, at the French Open. I'd watched Nadal versus Djokovic 2012 Australian Open final, which was, of course, an absolutely epic match that, unfortunately, Nadal lost. Yeah, he was up a break in the fifth set and had a backhand on the line that he missed. It was traumatic, that. But that was my first ever final, and even that was absolutely incredible. Particularly, I had to get up very early on that day because of the time difference in Australia. And I had that for a few years, where every January, towards the end of January, I'd get up at about 6 or 7 a.m, turn on the TV and watch the Australian Open final. And obviously that meant I watched a lot of Djokovic winning, of course, so I sort of stopped doing it after a while because, well, I'm not a big fan of Djokovic. I really respect him. and I think I do like him essentially as a person, but as a tennis player, and the fact that he's taken a lot of Grand Slams off Nadal, I obviously don't like. Alright, I just had some more tea. You know, and I've watched so many of Nadal's matches over the years, and of course there was a luxury and a joy in watching all of his matches pre 2012, his epic matches that he'd won. He'd already won quite a few, but since 2012, even him as a player, he's been on such a remarkable journey. You know, obviously in the latter half of, well, say obviously, perhaps not obviously, but in the latter half of 2012, so after he won this French Open against Djokovic that I watched the final of, he got injured and missed 7 months out of his career, and he only came back in the sort of late winter of 2013, and that was a journey. And he came back and he ended up finishing the year number one. But with Nadal, there's always a back and forth, because he has periodic injuries, and he always has done, and this is part of his sort of cycle as a player. You know, he will be injured, he'll come back, he'll win some more, he'll go away, he'll come back. But obviously you never know if you never know that this next comeback will yield success. You obviously hope for it, but you never know. And so there's always that tension of, is he finished? Is he going to win any more major tournaments? And obviously up to this point, it's been yes, which has been remarkable. You know, he's won far more than I thought he would win. I thought that he had won his last Grand Slam in 2014 when he won the French Open, which was a remarkable match. Truly physical battle against Djokovic, which, you know, Nadal was losing that match, and I watched it, and the spirit and the kind of the God mode that he entered after the end of the second set was truly incredible. I've never seen such tennis in such a final. You know, I thought that was it, and he didn't win another Grand Slam for 3 years. He had a very difficult few years there, and he was, you know, he hit 30 in that time. And traditionally in tennis, 30 is the point where a tennis player's career really starts to dwindle and fade away. But Nadal, along with Federer and Djokovic, have shown that 30 is not even nearly the end. If anything, it's just the beginning, because, you know, the amount of Grand Slams that all three of them have won after the age of 30 is actually remarkable. You know, they've won so many. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to witness Nadal's renaissance later in his career, post the age of 30, and been lucky enough to witness so many triumphal moments. And there's a kind of euphoria, as I've said, to sport that is really, it is magical. You know, I'm someone who really does believe in magic, you know, and I don't mean necessarily spells and wizardry, but, you know, magic is real. We've all felt it. We've all felt something that we cannot quite describe, that we don't want to quantify. We don't want to reduce to merely some sort of chemical occurrence, you know. And I think that all that is needed for you to believe in magic is simply that you believe in magic, you know. And I think your life will be so much richer as a result, you know, because we live in this age of sort of scientism and rationality, and there is a place for all of that, but, you know, there's increasingly less and less room, it seems, for the phenomenal, the truly intense emotional experience, and for that to really colour your perception of the world. You know, it seems to be that these days, if something can't be objectively measured or calculated or understood through a certain lens, you know, what is it really? And I really am opposed to that. I think that the more people can believe in, you know, magic, you know, and not do away with it and not demean these experiences that we all have. You know, and I'm not saying that you need to import more meaning or theory to these experiences than you need to, but simply just to say, hey, what that was magical. That experience was truly magical, and I'm so grateful for that, and not to overthink it, you know, and to just let loose and to let yourself enjoy these things, you know, because I'm a big fan of true acceptance as being a core value and process within myself, and I would urge everyone listening to also embrace that within themselves, because your life will be so much better off for it, I believe, you know, because in the last sort of few years I have allowed myself at times to drift or fall into a kind of nihilism, a kind of cynicism, a kind of fatalism. And my way out of this, the inevitable despair that comes from such mindsets, is a kind of romanticism. I mean, for me, it is literally romanticism with a capital R. It's really been a saving grace to me, particularly recently. You know, I drifted into a kind of despair, and I couldn't cope with the modern world as I saw it. But simply readjusting my mind and attuning a certain mindset again, that is romanticism, and believing in magic, believing in love, believing in true, genuine connection, and believing that you can pursue these things and you can actually experience them. You know, it all starts with belief. And this is true with sport, you know. The joy of experiencing a sporting moment, it begins not with the final event of that moment. It begins in the tension. It begins with, in the tension, believing, yeah, this might work. This might actually happen. That's where it begins. You know, because if you never believe something is going to happen, when it does happen, you won't be as happy as you would have been. Who knows if you'll even be happy at all? You know, you've got to allow yourself to believe. You know, I'm so excited just talking about it, because it's such a powerful notion, and I can't stress it enough. And I'm almost speaking it to solidify it within my own mind, and to never forget that no matter what tension you go through in life, hold on to a higher belief that things can get better, things can improve. You will find connection again, you will find meaning, you will find purpose. And there is so much meaning and purpose and connection in sport, if only you had the eyes and the heart to see it and to feel it. And we all do. You do. I know you do. Open your heart. Don't be spiteful. As Peter Doherty, perhaps my favourite musical artist, once said, open your heart. Don't be spiteful. You know, love your football team unashamedly. Love your family unashamedly. Love your friends. Love your partner. Love your pets. Love yourself. Love the world. And let that shine from you. And this is what sport can help people to unlock. This deep, primal love for being. You know, because when you're lost in a sporting moment, or in any moment of pleasure or ecstasy, you are beholden to the essential divinity of the world, to the magnificent state of being, to the magnificence of being. You embody that in that moment. You are the magnificence of being. And you are ethereal. You are simply connected and this is truly special. I don't know what else to say. I think I've said enough for now. But this film, Borg vs. Machina, really just motivated me to talk about this as I take another sip of tea. But yeah, that's my message for today. Open your heart, don't be spiteful. Believe. Believe. Believe before even you believe. It's coming home.